Good afternoon. This is Leslie, MassPAC Coordinator of the Federation for Children with Special Needs. Welcome to MassPAC's webinar entitled Assessment for Transition Planning and Services. We're so glad you're able to join us today. The Federation for Children with Special Needs started in 1974 by a group of parents who were part of a coalition that pushed to get the first special education law in the country passed. The Federation now provides information, support, and training to families whose children have special needs, special health care needs, and children who are at risk culturally, linguistically, and economically. MassPAC is one of the 15 projects that is under the Federation's umbrella. We provide technical assistance to special education parent advisory councils. One of our projects is also Transition. Today I will be facilitating the webinar. It's the second in our series on transition. It will be recorded and archived at a later date on the Federation's website. A few technical pointers. Please be advised that everyone will be muted except our presenter today. If you have any questions, please use the webinar toolbox that allows you to type in questions, and we'll either try to answer them during the presentation or I will collect them for the question and answer period of this webinar, which will follow the presentation. Our webinar today will be presented by Terry McLaughlin. Terry is our transition specialist in the Parent Training and Information Center here at the Federation. Terry coordinates transition workshops on IDEA related to transition planning and IEP development for students aged 14 to 22. Terry collaborates with many agencies, including the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, the Institute for Community Inclusion, Children's Hospital, the Mass Initiative for Youth with Disabilities and Special Health Care Needs at the Mass Department of Public Health, Boston Public Schools, and the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Commission. Welcome, Terry.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie, for that lovely introduction. I'm very excited to be here today. I think that this is a very, very important topic for everyone, families, school staff, and transition is a very complex time in a student's life. There are a lot of different issues to consider, and this is a very important one to understand. So today we're going to talk about the process and help you work through some of the issues around the process so that you'll be prepared and ready to work with your school. Not going. The purpose of IDEA, it's important to understand where IDEA is in this process. It really supports you to ensure that students access transition planning, transition assessments, and goals in the IEP. In the first paragraph of IDEA, it talks about the purpose: to ensure that all children with disabilities have available to them a free and appropriate public education, which is FAPE, that emphasizes special education and related services designed to meet their unique needs and prepare them for further education, employment, and independent living. And I call these the big three because whenever you're involved in transition, you should be thinking about these three areas. Everything you do means something to do with education, something to do with preparing for employment, and something to do with preparing for independent living. So you need to get ready early. Think about this really when a student is 13 in middle school. How are we going to put together this plan? What are we going to do? How do I get ready? So think about gathering information on special education law so you'll understand that at 14, transition planning should begin officially. What are the resources in your community to help you connect to your community to make things happen in the community? And what are the options offered to students without disabilities also? So you can know that anything that's offered to typical students in a school are also available to students with disabilities. Think about partnering with your team, information, resources, and begin to think about how you can take some risks in high school. Think about how you can make some mistakes. You know, special ed is there to support you when you make those mistakes, to change things and make things work better. And then begin to collect formal and informal data from your student about them. Who are they? What are their work interests? What are their leisure interests? What are their self-determination needs? and how do we think about the skill development that's going to help them on their way. So what is transition assessment? A lot of the materials we're going to use today are from the National Secondary Transition Technical Assistance Center, or NASTC. That you can go to Google, you can just Google NSTTAC, and you'll come to a wealth of information on transition and transition assessment. This information is also vetted by OSEP, the Office of Special Education Projects, and NASTC and OSEP partner with organizations like the Federation to make sure that we're providing you with good, clear information about process and law. So what is transition assessment? It's an ongoing process of collecting data on the individual needs, preferences, and interests as they relate to the demands of current and future working, educational, living, and personal and social environments. Assessment data serve as the common thread in the transition process and form the basis for defining goals and services to be included in the IEP. So this is going to be an ongoing process over time. Assessments will change. Each assessment will give you more information and new information, but when you read the information, you'll see again that it's talking about those big three areas: education, employment, and independent living. IDEA 2004 requires that students receive an appropriate age-appropriate transition assessments related to education, employment, and where appropriate, independent living. IDEA also states that age-appropriate assessments will help IEP teams make informed decisions about students reaching their post-secondary goals. And these are some samples of some different types of transitional assessments. Most people suggest some combination of these different assessments. They could be paper pencil tests, structured student and family interviews, observational or community work-based assessments, which are situational assessments, and curriculum-based assessments. But all of these assessments or procedures come in general formats, both formal and informal. So talk to your school, talk to the teachers about what type of testing they're thinking of using with your student. The student is a very important piece of this, so we need to find out what's going to work best for them. So why should we conduct transition assessments? Why are they important? Transition assessments may be undertaken for many, many different reasons. It might be to develop IEP goals and objectives on the transition component of the IEP. They might be important to make instructional programming decisions. They may be considered to include information on the present level of performance related to the student's interests, preferences, and needs. In addition, Indicator 13 of Part B of the State Performance Plans, which was required by the Office of Special Education Programs, stipulates that students age 16 but 14 in Massachusetts have IEP-based information from age-appropriate transition assessments. And this is a very important change in IDEA 2004. The idea of having appropriate transition assessments to determine IEP goals is very, very important and makes transition more like every other IEP goal, whether it's a occupational therapy goal or it's a speech and language goal. Each one of those goals was determined by an appropriate assessment. Transition assessment is an excellent way to learn about individual students, especially their strengths outside of academics and their career ambitions. And remember, assessments drive the special education process. As I mentioned earlier, whenever you were thinking about writing a goal in the IEP, what did you do in order to be prepared for that? Typically, you request some sort of an evaluation. To write those OT goals, the student met with an occupational therapist, someone who's qualified to do that evaluation and determine the needs of the student. And the same as it's the same case with transition. Transition assessments drive the transition process. So begin to think about, what do you want or need to know about this particular student? What area of continued skill development do you want to address in the IEP? Because IEP goals are skill-based. When we talk about transition goals, we're talking about continued skill development that's going to occur to support the student to meet their IEP goals, to meet their vision, to meet their post-secondary goal. In which transition outcome area do you want to write the transition goal? And again, think about the big three: education, employment, and independent living. And when we talk about education, we're also including any sort of education, training, or instruction. Employment is any type of working environment after high school. What does a student like to do? What is a student good at? And independent living. It's the goal of every student to be as independent as they can be. Most of us in our daily lives are as independent as we can be, and in many instances interdependent on other people in the community. So understanding what your functionality is in independent living is an important thing to consider and understand as you're looking at writing a goal with regard to continued skill development. Find out what to look for in a good transition assessment. So as you're requesting these assessments, begin to educate yourself on what does a good transition assessment look like. And you can find out by simply going to the web. Google, what is a good transition assessment? And you'll find a lot of information on the web about what these things would look like. Become familiar with different types of assessments and their characteristics. Think about assessment instruments that assist in answering the following questions with the student. And you can do this right now. You can think about your child, your student, and talk to them and ask them these questions. Who am I? What do I want in life, now and in the future? What are some of life's demands that I can begin to meet now? What are the main barriers to getting what I want in the community and preparing in the community? What are my options in school and the community for preparing me for what I want now and in the future? So you're going to think about what assessment tool is going to be appropriate for the student. Consider the nature of their disability, the post-school ambitions, and community opportunities. Educators say many different things about assessments. They say there are many assessment tools available, but without the student's interest in these assessments, they may not be very useful. They may not be helpful in helping us write a goal. Engaging the student and finding an appropriate assessment to their learning style is essential. Everyone learns differently. If we combine our tools to include both formal and informal assessments, we should be that much closer to understanding the individual needs and can develop measurable goals. So what are some assessment characteristics? First, become familiar with the different types of transition assessments and the characteristics. It's recommended that you use multiple evaluations to do them on an ongoing basis. Assessment methods must incorporate assistive technology or accommodations when necessary, occur in environments that resemble actual vocational training, employment, independent living, or community environments. So that means that if you're going to be evaluated on how you're able to do something, you should be doing it. I kind of think of, if you're going to learn to swim, you need to get into a pool. And it's the same way. It's the same thing when someone is being evaluated with regard to their ability to do something. It's also important because as students move closer and closer to exit from special education or exit from the entitlement of services in school, they should be thinking about how well they generalize these experiences in real life. So it's important that for those students, particularly students 18 to 22, assessments occur in environments that are truly resemble where they're going to be working or living. Assessment methods must produce outcomes that contribute to ongoing development, planning, and the implementation of next steps in the individual's transition. They must be varied and include a sequence of activities that sample behavior over time. There must be data, and the data must be synthesized and interpreted to individuals with disabilities, their families, and transition team members. And they must show results that the assessment process must be documented in a format that can be used to facilitate the transition planning, which means it needs to be able to give them guidance and information on how to write a goal to address that need. And selected methods should be appropriate for the learning characteristics of the individual, including cultural and linguistic differences. This is a very important component for us and for families. Understanding family culture is key to the process. In order to be more effective and comprehensive in the planning, it is essential that transition team members consider and familiarize themselves with the cultural context of the family. This ensures that the plan will address and meet the distinctive characteristics, concerns, and circumstances of that family. For example, Hispanic family members may define their role in the child's life differently in comparison to African European American families. It is vital that the transition team reflect on how these roles vary from family to family and culture to culture. So let's look at the assessment process. It's both formal and informal. It still addresses the needs, preferences, and interests of the student, and that's so important because the IEP in general and the development of appropriate goals in general are based on the student's needs. As students move into the transition point in their life, we add preferences and interests. The goal is for students to really understand what they're good at and what they like to do. And we're going to ask these questions over and over so that we really hone down and understand what their skills are, what their needs are, and what they need to do with regard to transition goals and services in order to address those. They should relate to current and future educational, working, living, and personal and social environments. Again, when you look at that, it addresses the big three: education, employment, and independent living. Assessment data serve as the common thread in the transition process. It forms the basis for defining goals and services that are to be included in the IEP. This information comes from DCT, the Division on Career Development and Transition, which is part of the Office of Exceptional Children, CEC, Center for Exceptional Children. And in Massachusetts, we now have a division of DCDT, and we're very proud of that. We started that about 6 months ago, and we're hoping in the future to offer lots of resources and support and eventually have a nice transition conference here in the Boston area. So what do some appropriate transition assessments look like? What do we mean by this? And of course, it's important to, again, to reiterate that this is part of IDEA 2004. It's something that is required to happen to write the goals. So there's a law behind it, and there's compliance. The assessments add the data to document the need. And again, we're talking about the areas of strength and weakness and interest. And it's related to any type of assessment that's appropriate for the student. It's an individualized process. So that's determined on what the student wants to do, what do they want to learn. And it can be in the area of training, education. It could be a functional vocational evaluation to determine what type of vocational goal we're going to write in the IEP. It could be in the area of independent living, again, to determine their functionality to care for themselves and to live independently in the community. It could be a functional behavioral assessment, and behavioral assessments are helpful not only to address needs in the school environment, but also it could be in the work environment or other places in the community. So if behavior is an important component of the student's disability, then those functional behavioral assessments should be done in various environments to give you that big picture about the needs of the student in that area. Assistive technology is another key assessment area, because today in this world, assistive technology is there for all of us. We're using it more and more and more, and it really gives students a much better level of access to their world in those three areas of education, employment, and independent living. And there are many other appropriate transition assessments, and we'll talk about them as we go through the webinar today. Some different types of informal assessments, because there are formal and informal assessments, and each is very, very important. They talk about different types of needs to address the student. Some are a bit more subjective depending on who's doing the informal assessment, and some more formal assessments may be required depending on the needs of the student. Informal assessments generally lack formal reliability and validity measures. Informal assessments require a little bit more subjectivity to complete and should be given more than once by a variety of different people to really strengthen their validity. Some examples of paper-pencil informal assessments can be accessed in a variety of different environments. One of them could be the NSTTAC website. There's also another great environment that can give you information about transition assessments called the Transition Coalition out of the University of Kansas. And we have everyone's email from the webinar today. We're going to send you a list of some great websites and also some assessments you can consider that will give you a little bit more guidance on what you might think about. You can look at these assessments and find out whether you think they would be appropriate. But some other examples of informal assessments are questionnaires, direct observations, situational assessments, which would mean, observing a student in the situation, in the environment that you're evaluating. So if a student is going to do a vocational assessment, you might want to do an assessment of the student in the community or in a work environment. A learning style assessment to determine what is the student's learning style, making sure that their vision and some of the work opportunities they're considering, go along with their learning style. There are some curriculum-based assessments that teachers can use on a daily schedule. Structured interviews can be done by family members, can be done by job coaches, can be done by classroom teachers. Personal future planning activities can be made available. Many of these assessments, you can simply Google some of these possible assessments and get a lot more information on them online. Functional skill inventories and environmental analysis. In other words, where does a student function best? Do they enjoy being outside in an open environment? Do they enjoy working with lots of different people? What is their functionality in those areas? And that will help you understand that. The A.P.I.E model is an interesting way to look at transition. It stands for assess, plan, instruct, and evaluate. In the first step, assess, educators assess the student's interests, preferences, and needs related to his or her post-school outcomes by using a variety of formal or informal assessments. The second step, or plan, involves interpreting the results from these assessments and incorporating them into the student's transition plan. The third step, instruct, the students learn the skills they will need to reach their post-school goals. And in the last step, evaluate whether progress has been made toward achieving transition activities and IEP goals and objectives. So it's a good way to think about how the process and the framework of the process is going to work. Some formal assessments you can think about, and there are some listed here, and they're quite different than informal assessments. They're more standardized instruments. They've been tested to have the data to show reliability and validity measures to support their use. In general, these assessments also have independent reviews that you can find online to find out about whether or not how these tests were used, and also some samples of more formal assessments. So you can find some of this information online, which is helpful for families. So you can, when you're thinking about what you want to know about a student, you can really give some help and guidance to the process by understanding a little bit more about what these assessments look like and what they should do. For example, an adaptive behavior assessment determines the type and amount of special assistance that people with disabilities may need. This assistance might be in the form of home-based support services for infants and children with their families, special education and vocational training for young people, and supported work or special living environments such as personal care attendants, group homes, or nursing homes for more disabled individuals and adults. So tests rely on a respondent such as a parent, teacher, or care provider to provide information about an individual being assessed. And you can find some of these assessments online, and again, we'll send you a list of some of these different types of assessments. Some general and specific aptitude tests. An aptitude test is a measure of a specific skill or ability. There are two types of aptitude tests: multi-aptitude test batteries and single tests measuring specific aptitudes. So you can see that more formal assessments are more complicated, and you really need to understand what type of test would be most appropriate for a student. Interest and work value inventories. These are one of the original vocational types of tests. They can be career inventories, interest inventories, and other types of question-answer interest tests. And then there are intelligence tests, which many of you are familiar with. Achievement tests to measure the learning of general or specific academic skills. Personality or preference tests. Personality inventories measure individual preferences in social traits, motivational drives, and needs, attitudes, and adjustment. Personality measures offer a means of evaluating support for or opposition to a particular career under consideration. So these are different types of tests like Myers-Briggs, Student Styles Questionnaire, 16 personality factor questionnaires, and again, we'll give you some of this information online. There are career or maturity readiness tests, self-determination assessments to provide information as to one's readiness to make decisions related to their post-secondary ambitions. Self-determination tests are important to help understand how able is a student to make choices. In fact, one of the assessments is called Choice Maker Self-Determination Assessment. There are work-related and temperament scales, transition planning inventories. Lots of different ways you can begin to evaluate a student. And remember that transition assessments are ongoing. So whenever you want to change a goal or introduce a goal, some type of assessment should be available to you to understand how you need to write a goal in that particular area. And where's the, another big issue is accountability, because assessments, transitional assessments, like any other assessment, require the same compliance with regard to your request. You must always make your request for a specific transitional assessment in writing. So instead of requesting simply a transition assessment, begin to educate yourself on what type of transitional assessment you want to consider. And again, think about the big three: education, employment, and independent living. Like any other assessment, the district always has the authority to do their own first. So this is a very important conversation that you should have with the school to talk about what type of assessment is going to occur and who is going to do the assessment, to make sure that the person who's going to do the assessment has an understanding of the assessment itself and how to read the results and use them in order to guide the development of an IEP goal. Transition assessments must be completed within 30 school working days, like any other assessment request. So you make the request in writing, you provide your consent, and once you provide your consent, the clock starts ticking, and within 30 school working days, the transition assessment must be completed. And within 45 school days total, the assessment should be done, the meeting scheduled, and IEP goals written. So one thing you might think about is making sure that when you make the request in writing, you request a meeting so that you can provide your consent to keep this on a schedule. Transition is a very challenging time with regard to keeping things on schedule. There are many things happening in the busy lives of schools and families and students. So make sure you understand process-wise the best way to make the request in writing and keep it moving. With your request, you must be provided with a written report 48 hours before the scheduled meeting. So you might consider, when you make your request for a transition assessment in writing, you might consider including a request that you be provided with the report 48 hours before the scheduled meeting. When you meet to give your consent, you also might want to make a meeting at that time, schedule a meeting so that all these things are all ready, all in place, and you understand within a certain amount of time everything will be done. You'll also understand when that transition goal will be written on in the IEP. On the additional information page, which is the page where you give where you put your signature on your IEP, you might also note the date of your written request and the type of transition assessment you requested. That way you have a reference when you go to the meeting to look right there and see you made the request, the school agreed to do the evaluation, so that it's just another way you can ensure that you know and the school knows the request has been made and plans to write a goal are all in place. So think about, when you're thinking about transition assessments, remember that career development is the process through which people come to understand themselves as they relate to the world of work and their role in it. And in preparing for a job and working after high school is a tremendous challenge for students with disabilities. It's a challenge for everyone, but for students with disabilities, it's even a greater challenge. But it's so important because it's another social network and outlet for you to show what you can do and what you know. So when you think about developing a career, it's important to think about different types of transitional assessments that will help you along the way. There are 4 different phases of career development: finding a job and working in the community, career awareness, career exploration, career preparation, and career assimilation. Each one of these things is important, and along the way, transitional assessments are going to help you understand where you are in the process. So career awareness, and this is a type of transitional assessment just in and of itself. What is work? What is a job? What kind of work do people do on these jobs? What kind of jobs do you want? Why do people work? What jobs do your mother, father, or other family members hold? What is college and why do people go to college? What is public transportation? What is voting? And if you think about career awareness, when you go out with your child, part of transition is a parent's responsibility too. We're all in this together. Walk into a store with your student and have a list. Ask them to write down how many people they see working in that store and how many different jobs do they do, and what job intrigues them. Some of that's a typical type of informal assessment that you could do with your child with regard to what do they think they want to do. And many times I hear from families that their child has no idea what they want to do as they get older, or what they might want to have on their transition plan, what they might want to have on their IEP as a vision for life after high school. And once you begin to hone in on what type of a career you might be interested in, you might begin to think about how to explore that career to find out more about what it is and what it means and what you need to have that type of a job. So what jobs are you interested in visiting? And talk to the guidance counselor, talk to your team about visiting those environments and talking to people who do those jobs. What exploratory courses would you like to take in school to help you prepare for those jobs? And that coursework is available to you through the IEP process. If you need special education support in order to take those courses, special ed is there to help you with that. What hobbies do you have? Or what activities do you do in your leisure time? These are another type of transitional assessment, finding out what you like to do with your free time. Life after high school oftentimes includes free time, hopefully. What do you want to do with your free time? Do you want to learn about how to use your free time? This is a time to talk about that. What type of volunteer or community service work do you do, or would you like to do? Community service is a great way for a student to begin to see how to work, understand the world of work. In community service, everyone is doing the same job and giving a very precious thing that each one of us have, and that is time. Do you like being inside or working outside? Sometimes that community service job will give you that environmental assessment that you want to know to understand, do you like working outside, being out in the fresh air, or would you rather be inside where the environment is more controlled? Do you enjoy working with your hands or with tools, or do you want to solve problems in your head? Some people are very, very hands-on. They like to do things with their hands. They like to interact with the soil, the ground, tools, whatever it is they like to do. Again, this is another type of informal assessment to get a good sense of when is a student happiest? What do they really enjoy? And do you get along with your classmates? Because we find that students who get along with their office mates, get along with their workmates, make good employees. And the same challenges you face for students who are challenged working with their classmates are the same problems they'll be faced with when they have to be on the job. And we find that oftentimes students don't lose their job, or individuals don't lose their job because they can't do their job. It's because they can't function in the work environment that they've chosen. So this begins in school. This begins with the classmates. How well do you interface with your peers in the school environment? In career preparation, as you move through this process of exploration, think about the courses you need to achieve these career goals. What skills will you need to gain entry into these different courses? So you're building on various skills. The coursework that you take in middle school, into high school, and into post-secondary education, each one supports the other. You need to begin to think about these courseworks early. When you look at that high school coursework, you need to look at everything in that high school coursework, not just the academic experience, but the big three: education, employment, and independent living. So what are the courses that will help you reach your goals, reach your dreams? Because you'll be thinking about those long before you get to the high school. Some of those will be academic courses, other may be extracurricular activities, or they might be intramural sports. They could be the drama club. But these courses and these experiences are truly preparing you for your career and your life after high school. And how prepared are you to live on your own? We need to be thinking about this early on. Assessments in these areas will really help you. So as you think about work, as you think about independent living, as you think about education, each one of these different areas supports the other. So are you going to live on your own? Are you going to live away from your family? How can you begin to learn about your needs and your abilities in order to step through the process of learning these skills? Will you need to take courses during high school and after? Will you be able to get a job based on your high school or college coursework? So as you think about that job, are you taking the courses that are going to help you get there? Every student in high school does this. Every student chooses coursework that's going to help them to be who they want to be or go where they want to go. And it's the same for an individual who has challenges. What do you want to take in high school to prepare you for these jobs and these opportunities? And does the educational program you're in provide a job placement and support? If that's something that's really going to be critically important to you, you want to make sure that within that educational program you can learn about different job placements and learn about different work supports that will help you to learn piece by piece, step by step, what you need to do to be good at that job. Career assimilation. Can you continue your training and education as you begin your employment? What skills do you need to keep or grow in your job? Can you transfer between departments in the company? So many of these things are going to tell you a little bit more about whether or not you want to choose that job. If you have difficulty transitioning from different departments or doing a variety of different tasks, it's important to talk about those things early on. You really want to narrow that search as you get closer and closer to the end of school, because you really want to begin to decide, what do I want to try? What would that on-the-job training mean for me? What type of support do I need in the community in order to do that job? And along the way, transition assessments are really going to help you to fill in the blanks, fill in the spaces. There are a variety of different resources and supports out there to help you with this. Some of these listings are available obviously online. Casey Life Skills and Career Cruising, some of these are looking at different independent living skill assessments, different types of work type of assessments, and that you can download them. The Transition Coalition has some wonderful information on evaluation and support support for students with disabilities. Universal Design for Transition is a terrific book that I encourage you to check out. It's extremely helpful for parents, but also for schools just to support students with disabilities. It's looking at how do you design curriculum in the high school in order to be more prepared and have it more accessible to all students. So I thought, I didn't know if we had any questions. We're kind of at the end here, ending a little bit early.
Well, thank you, Terry. Once again, you've given us so much to think about, so much information. I think as we go through this process, you know, the more information, the better. I do have a couple of questions that have come in, so I'll pass them on here. Do you have any tips to get the student involved in this whole process? Because I know they should be the driving source, but a lot of times they're very hesitant. They, you know, don't really know what they want to do with the rest of their life, and how do you guide a student through this process?
Well, you know, one thing that students, it is really student-based and can really get a student active in the process is develop some sort of a portfolio. And a portfolio can be just as simple as a 3-ring binder with some plastic sleeves in it from Staples. Begin to collect best work and things that the student is proud of. Start with taking some things off the refrigerator that you've put up there and stuck up there and they've been up there for too long. And take them off and start to write a little story about why it was up there. Talk to your student about why they were happy to put it up there. Talk about what the student has in their living space that they're happy with or excited about or proud of. Maybe put something in the portfolio. If the student is a musician, there might be a CD or might be a video of something that they've done. Who knows? Nowadays we have so many things on YouTube and so many different types of assistive technology out there to help students show what they know. And that's kind of what a portfolio is. It begins to show a student what the student knows, but it also gives the student an opportunity to help people understand what they like, what they're interested in, what they're proud of. They can be the publisher, they can be the producer of this story, and they should be. And all of a sudden you'll start to see what were they interested in putting in the portfolio, and that might give you some guidance and begin to get a sense of, you know, what are the things that they like the best, because the portfolio truly is a reflection of who they are.
That's a great tip. I think we should do that for all students.
Yeah, anybody can start that, no matter how old the student is. Just start to collect a few things. You'll be amazed at how quickly those things will come together.
Another question is that you want to transfer some of this assessment data into real goals on the IEP. How many transition goals should be on an IEP?
That's a great question. And I know at one point a while ago there was some conversation about goals have to be limited. You can only have so many goals. Well, under IDEA, there's no limitation of goals that can be in the IEP. But I think we should always consider how many things do you want to accomplish in this year. And you know, as you look at transition, you should be looking at it as a continuum of experience. That's why by law we're supposed to begin this process starting at age 14. You know, and if you begin the process at 14 and you're doing it piece by piece by piece, every year changing, every year modifying, adjusting, considering different assessments and assessment tools and evaluative materials, you know, each year those experiences are building on the next. You know, as you begin to think about travel training, for example, which should be on every student's IEP. How are you going to get from home to work? How are you going to get from work to those leisure activities that you really enjoy? And that goal on the IEP should change. Initially, it might be just thinking about how to get around your community, how to get around your school, but eventually it should be looking at I'm the driver, or I'm on that bus, or how am I going to get there? And as that experience grows and develops, the student will have more opportunities in work and in community living. So each one of these goals on the IEP intersects with the other. And if you continue to think about the big three, so if you're looking at what type of educational and instructional assessments do you want to consider, what type of work assessment do you want to consider to help the student to be more prepared, and what type of independent living do you want to assessment do you want to consider. And that independent living assessment could be an assessment to determine whether or not the student is going to drive. It could be assessment to determine environmentally what type of environment is the student best suited for. But there are a variety of different assessments in those three areas that you should consider each year to guide you in the development of transition goals in those three areas of education, instruction, and training, work or different types of employment, and independent living and community goals.
Oh, great. Another question is, is the school responsible for setting up these work experience or these community internship type of experiences?
That's a great question. And each one of these things, as they are developed as a goal in the IEP, would absolutely be the responsibility of the school. So, for example, say the student has begun working in the copy center at the high school, and they've been doing that for a couple of years, and now the student has been in the high school for 4 years, they've been in the copy center, they've been delivering mail, maybe they've been working in the library. As they begin to move out of special education, for some students that might be their senior year, for other students it might be between the ages of 18 and 22. Those work opportunities that they've been working on all these years in the high school should now move into the community, and the supports move with them. Students need to be able to generalize that learning that they experienced in the high school and then move it into the community. So if they need some sort of work support, if they need help to find that internship or that work opportunity in the community, that is absolutely the responsibility, and the school should be there and the team should get together to determine what would those choices be. Particularly for students, some students go to school in their own district. There are other students who are going to school in an outplacement. They may live on the North Shore and attend school closer to Boston. So those work experience should transfer to their home community if, in fact, that's their vision, that is where they're going to end up, that is where they're going to live, so that they can really generalize and have a real job in the community when they exit the entitlement of special ed. Your life shouldn't change that dramatically. As you move from special education and living in and working and being placed in a high school setting, you should be moving out into the community to practice those skills and ensure that once special ed is all over, once you have exited the entitlement, that you have a real job and a real life in the community.
Great. I think that's a great ending, Perry. It's something we all aspire to, is making sure these students really go out and have a wonderful life. Just to plug Terry's transition planning, she also does a Planning a Life 2-day seminar for parents. We just had one in February. I believe the next one is in...
we had one we had one last weekend. It was awesome. We had 55 people. It was a wonderful 2 days. And the next one will be in Springfield, the second Friday and Saturday in April. And we don't have a site yet, but as soon as we have a site, we'll post it online.
But you can always check the Federation website for information about that. I'd like to let people know also that the last webinar in this 3-webinar series on transition will be on Wednesday, April 25th from 12 to 1 again. It's about writing transition goals and that process, and we'll finish off the process. I'd like to thank you for attending today, and special thanks for our IT Director, John Sullivan, who's been facilitating this today. Thank you, and look forward to an email from us with some more resources.